Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for coming. So this is Stories from Earth. This is a project that I've been working on this year as part of my Earth Systems capstone. Essentially, what I did is I basically took transcriptions of a bunch of interviews with many of you and some other people about sort of their passion for the environment and nature and why they do the work that they do. And those became the basis for the monologues that we're hearing today. And then I essentially wrote a bunch of music to go with it. So I hope you enjoy it. It should last about 30 minutes. And then I'm more than happy to sort of hold a little Q&A afterwards. So I hope you enjoy.
but I found a book of it. I remember sitting next to the bookcase in my house, my favorite spot in the whole world, just reading the book. I started realizing how big of a problem we had, and it freaked me out. I mean, I was an angsty teenage girl. The back 2 pages were about solutions. Things like turn off the lights or buy an electric vehicle. I was like 12, so I couldn't exactly buy a new car. And we usually left the lights off anyway, so I started looking for another way to make a difference. I started researching styrofoam cups and the impact of them on the environment. And then I wrote this big, way too long 7-page letter. I gave it to the mayor of our town and a couple local restaurants. One restaurant actually switched to paper cups, but another gave me a mug and told me to use that when I came back to the restaurant. I was too embarrassed to ever go back. I guess it goes back to Jane Goodall. She was such an individual, one of the first women in her field, and she didn't follow the rules. She worked as a waitress to fund her work, and she brought her mother with her to hold down the camp while she was in the field. She named her chimps when before they had only been given numbers, and then she finally made a huge breakthrough when she found out that chimps use tools, just like us. I wanted to be like her, to be an individual making a difference. I still do.
Why did I become a vegetarian? Guilt. I'm 2 weeks into being a vegetarian. I used to live with these 2 guys. One of them was a vegetarian, the other was a real red meat lover. They would argue about vegetarianism, whether it was legit, whether it actually had any impact. I guess I realize now that I always sided with my vegetarian roommate. This year I started living with 2 other guys. Both of them are vegetarian. So it was inevitable. We've talked about it a lot, and I thought I would finally give it a try. Look, it's fine. Now don't get me wrong, my favorite food is still steak. And I'm still just trying it out, you know? We'll see.
I was definitely raised in a very outdoorsy family. We lived in Brazil and Australia for a while and traveled around hiking. I guess in that sense, I'm not so different from a lot of people who go on to study the environment. I really noticed what was going on when we lived in Melbourne, Australia. I was about 10 years old, and this was a time of environmental disasters in Australia. There was the ozone hole. I went to an all-girls school and had to wear uniforms with skirts, and we had to wear sunscreen every day, even in the winter. And there were forest fires every single summer. And I remember the first day of summer when I was about 11, I walked out of my house down to the street, and I couldn't see 20 feet in front of me because of the smoke. The fires were almost 3 hours away from Melbourne, but there was so much smoke that we couldn't see across the street. The last thing was just an ongoing drought. There were severe water restrictions, so of course we followed them and stopped watering our plants. And the landlords would get really mad at us because the yard would dry up and all the plants would die. loves to hike. That's like her favorite activity. Whenever we go on vacation, my dad will want to go golfing and my mom will want to go hiking. And sitting in the golf cart is so boring, so I went with my mom. My favorite childhood memories are traveling to national parks. Zion, Bryce, Grand Canyon. We car camped in all those places. I was always a very whiny little hiker when I was a kid, but I eventually learned that I could actually like hiking. There's this place called the Narrows in Zion, where the trail runs in and out of the river on both sides of the canyon. My dad and I would just wander around in the afternoon and boulder into the river because it was so hot. We were just like hanging out there in the river.
Since middle school. Did cross country in high school, and I've gotten really into trail running in college. You know, I took this class called Nature, Humanity, and Spirituality. It was an amazing class experience, partially because I got to write a spiritual autobiography. And this is cliche for me, I guess, but I wrote from the perspective of a run, going through people in my life and things that have influenced me, and relating it to running on a trail. That really is my spiritual access. I think that everything we talk about with faith and God can be explained biologically and physically. I don't think humans will ever be at the point to understand these things, soul and spirit, but they can be explained scientifically, and I don't think we'll ever be at that point. I think we'll be extinct. The kind of connection I feel when I'm immersed in something that's not man-made, something that's not actively destroying nature, even in places devoid of life, like Death Valley, where they just dirt and stars. I can't call it comforting, but I think being away from the human parts of my life, I can tap into that sense of wonder and oneness, and I'm happy being mystified, attempting to understand and trying to communicate, expressing through art, trying to do things that bring me more into that zone. For me, all of that is trail running, pushing my body, listening to my body, and all these signals to the landscape I'm running in, trying to formulate how I'm interacting with that space. That's all there is to it.
I was on holiday with super cool. I mean, we spent a lot of time in the mountains of Montana, and we go and visit a different US city every summer. We went to Stanford one summer, and it was kind of nice, but quiet because it was the summer. I knew that I was interested in geology, and during that visit, I ran into Richard. And Richard was pretty great, so I came here. I got to try out my dream of backpacking around and looking at rocks. Not quite as glam as I wanted it to be. Every day bumping down the dirt road with a bunch of geologists in the back of a van. I realized I wanted to learn about geology and to share it. But I didn't want to be the one actually doing the research. I guess I love mountains. I've always loved mountains. And I want to find a way to communicate that love with others. And that's why I've come from geology to the dark side of environmental communication. Took me a really long time to figure it all out. Recycle this, or take a shorter shower. But that would be about it, you know? My 16th birthday was a turning point for me in many ways. It was supposed to be my sweet 16 and all that, but, well, my 16th birthday was the day Hurricane Sandy destroyed my house. Birthday cake, floating in 5.5 feet of water in my house. You know, it was kind of like, this is happening right now? The Earth is not this distant thing. It's something we live on. And that seems sort of obvious, but sometimes we forget. I don't think I'll ever forget.
about the places people are connected to. For me, it was a little boy growing up in Houston, Texas, living on the coastal prairies and coastal flats. I must have been about 6 when we drove all the way to Big Bend National Park. And I remember waking up in the morning and seeing this purple stripe across the horizon, and they were mountains. My parents told me later that I cried. And during other camping trips to Colorado, I think I started falling in love with the earth. I was a feral child and spent most of all the time I could outside. And I think that was the way my mom liked it. We didn't have very much money, so we couldn't afford any backpacking equipment, but I just pined over it. Then I went to college and met all these cool outdoor people with their cool equipment, and didn't get a chance to backpack until after college. My parents bought me a backpack as a graduation present. I went backpacking by myself in the Andes for a while. I started working with this group to make something that looked a lot like Google Earth, a user-friendly GIS, in which you could use images from several decades apart to look at environmentally critical locations. And we used that to tell stories. My job was to write all the content for these, and in the middle of this, with all my reading and seeing these images, I had the experience that a lot of students in Earth systems get, where you become incredibly depressed and hopeless about the state of the world. Ultimately, it comes back down to, I need to recuperate in nature. And for me, that's up in the Sierra Nevada. We all need to find these places that restore us. We're lovers of the land. And that's what we're drawn by, is that love. And for me, that connects to the plants and animals, the water that flows on, the attachment to the place, connectedness and belonging, and it makes sense that you're there. I've lived long enough to see transformation in my own lifetime. I could be depressed, or shift to a more hopeful perspective. And that's what I've done, seeing all these amazing students going out in the world with passions for the planet similar to my own. The feral naturalist, choosing hope.
For me, it definitely did start in childhood. My parents and none of my siblings have any attachment to nature whatsoever, so I was an anomaly. My parents were really into, well, benign neglect, and so my brothers and I were very wild children, and anytime there were woods, we were out there. I took to it more than they did, so I was out alone a lot, and no one really thought about it. We moved around a lot because my dad was a baseball player and got traded a bunch, so I got to explore nature in a bunch of different places. I didn't really go to grade school, and I think my observational skills were honed because of it. I was out in the woods most of the time. I spent a lot of time in a tree, not for any political reason, but just to be there, to sit and look and listen and learn. My grandparents were really rooted in their generation, which meant they grew their own food, and so I learned a bit of that and the connecting to the land, but I really started picking up with it during college, reading books on my own. There weren't classes on environmental biology or anything, not then. When I first moved to California, I lived near Jasper Ridge, so I was a frequent trespasser. There were no fences, so I wasn't really a trespasser. I still knew it was illegal. I just loved walking around outside, walking and thinking and looking for answers, or maybe just walking around answers. Later in life, after a bunch of various jobs in the Bay Area, some okay, some really just a paycheck, I was talking to someone about how I loved spending time outside, and they said, well, you should get a job that does that. So I did. For me, I really think that if I couldn't have the majority of my waking hours outside, it would be terrible. That's where I find peace and creativity and help. It's about putting yourself where you belong. We belong in nature. Some people say cliches like, oh, I'm just spending time outside, recharging. But it's more than that. It's being.
Definitely comes from having grown up in Jackson, Wyoming. The fact that both my parents moved there for their love of being outside. That's the sort of family that I grew up in. Two ski-bum parents who decided to get real jobs when they discovered they were becoming parents. I remember every summer, we would always go on a canoe camping trip with a couple of my friends down the street. We would canoe out to an island in the lake and just set up and play around at the beach for hours. We would collect sap from all the trees and use it to make candles, and then light it on fire. When I was a cross-country skier in high school, my coach was a very interesting individual. He's sort of like a large middle-aged teddy bear who's very inappropriate. He cared more about people being outside than skiing itself. He had 3 imaginary friends, and one of them was Coco Pelli. And Coco Pelli would be there to remind us to be one with nature, about having fun, enjoying being outside, being tough. I sort of came to Stanford and realized the environment was not as close as I needed it to be. I would go on nighttime runs to get away from people and be closer to things, like trees. It's something that continually inspires me. Nature. I guess being in nature just allows me to be more myself and more free with... There's not really an end to that sentence. Less restrained than I am around large groups of people. And it just makes me happy.
But I'm more than happy to answer any questions about that, how it came to be, etc. So.
Can you introduce your players?
Yes, actually, let's do that. Our 2 wonderful actors, Elisa Vidales and Zach Dammann. Delenn on cello, deMayo on Clarinet, and Eliott Program on Flute. Right. So yes, questions.
What made you pick this particular quartet of instruments?
Yeah. Well, for a long time, as Dylan knows, I was thinking about having a violin, cello, and clarinet. And Kelly convinced me otherwise. Okay, so, and the way she convinced me was by saying, I think I can get an alto flute. And alto flutes are just larger, deeper, more resonant flutes. I really like them. They don't get played very often.
That was
So,
my second question.
yes. And so with that accessible to me as an orchestrator, I was like, okay, we're going with it. I think it worked out. I think it worked out pretty well.
Oh, lovely.
So, yeah, it was kind of this way.
Was one of those stories your own?
No. One that you guys probably didn't recognize if you got most of them was actually my good friend from high school who goes to Santa Clara. That was the one about sort of spirituality and running. So yeah, that class doesn't exist at Stanford. It does at Santa Clara. Anyway, yes.
I had a question for the musicians. I was wondering how it felt different to play this beautiful music while people were reading their stories. Like whether that was different for you in some way. Were you following them or were they following you?
We were following him.
And to a large degree, I had written the music correctly and everything lined up. There were only a few places where I had to sort of change the plan mid-song, but things worked out.
But I wanted to listen to the stories, but you kind of have to ignore what they're saying.
Yeah, to play meter. You have to make sure that you're not placing your emphasis on their words because they're not written to line up exactly.
Yeah, that's something, you know, at least two of you play theater. Have you played theater before? So like, you know, that's something that we're used to is actually intentionally trying to line things up, you know, with vocals. And so this is a different ballgame. Yeah.
I loved the lyrical wistfulness of the melodies throughout, and I thought it perfectly accompanied the story. I'm curious, you just mentioned Peter the Wolf as a sort of similar narrative story. What kind of inspired you as you were composing this music to bring out the melodic lines the way you did?
A lot of it was orchestrationally. Those two processes, composing and orchestration, were for this piece together. I didn't write everything on the piano and then orchestrate it, which is another common way of working. And so that was very much me thinking, oh, I have a clarinet. Let's do this thing because I have a clarinet, or something similar. I think it also had something to do with the idea of cocobelly and sort of Navajo flutes and Native American flutes and sort of how those melodies maybe not ever showed up authentically, they didn't, but sort of were inspiration for longer melodic lines. I think that was something that was sort of there throughout the process for me.
Did you have that idea then when you first, I mean, I don't know how this project came to be, when you recommended this project, did you want to do this sort of earth theme?
Well, yeah, that was part of it because, I don't think you were here for the intro, but because this was for my Earth Systems capstone. So there was definitely that. But it's all good. It's all good, Mike. Don't worry. But like the specific concepts, like I had no idea that sort of that influence of cocobelly and Navajo flutes and whatnot would appear until I did one of my interviews. And so that was just one of those like luck of the draw kind of things that happened and ended up inspiring a lot of the music.
So I thought the music was great, and I think, I could be wrong, that you didn't try to use the music to embody what they're talking about, like the sound, big mountains, or a sunrise, or something like that, which could get very programmatic and maybe a little kitschy or something. So did you not, the music didn't sound like it was doing that, it was just supporting the story.
Yeah, it was more for me about the character of the narratives and the people who sort of fed me those stories and sort of how I would capture that moment. There was one place where it did get very programmatic, and that was, of course, the hurricane. That was intentional. But aside from that, yes, you know, I didn't necessarily want things to. It's also really hard to make everything line up perfectly. In the same way in musical theater, you have singing, so you have a tiny bit more ability to track things as they're moving through the score. But here, you know, we had a lot of leeway, so I couldn't necessarily intentionally cause things to line up perfectly anyway. So yeah, it was more about the big picture.
Makulumy, I remember when you came up with the idea for this, what were the big surprises, what were the big turning points and learning moments for you in taking this really ambitious project?
Composing takes a lot of time. You can ask my residents, they probably like walked by my door many times in the past few months and just saw me like with my headphones on at my keyboard, just like staring at my laptop. For like hours. So there's that. That was a big one. I knew it took a lot of time, but I think what took more time than I anticipated was the thought process of, you know, I come up with an idea and the actual act of writing the piece wouldn't necessarily be attached to the moment of coming up with the musical idea. There might be a week in between in which you feel horrible about yourself because you're not doing anything for a week, but in reality it's sort of, you know, in your mind and you're turning it over in your mind. Whether or not you're consciously working with it, I guess you are, because then you sit down a week later and all of a sudden the music comes out and you're surprised by that. So that's the most surprising thing, I would say. Also, you know, I had anticipated it being difficult to set this many of these monologues and keep the whole thing cohesive. But I think musically I was able to grab enough references from previous material in the piece and keep bringing them back that it felt like a construction. You guys tell me on that one.
How did you decide the order of the monologue?
A certain amount of it, to be honest, was a bit of our actor gender based. I didn't necessarily want all those acts to be at the end or all the Elisas to be at the end, or, you know, so there was a bit of that. But it also, as with any theatrical piece, you do want there to be a larger arc, and you want the climactic moment, which in some ways, again, was the hurricane, to be in the second half energetically, because then you need some time for sort of recuperation after that. And so I was sort of picking stories that sort of fit that model once I figured out my landmarks of, you know, where the hurricane was going to go and where maybe like the river piece was, and I knew there was going to be a musical interlude for that, etc. Yeah. Sorry, that wasn't the most cohesive thought, but anything else?
So the monologues were mostly collected?
Yeah, I honestly can ask the folks here. I didn't change many words. Basically, those were verbatim, and I might have removed things to sort of focus them a bit toward a certain topic, but I really didn't add anything ever to the monologue. So whether or not you thought you said that, you did. Yeah, it was all collected.
Did you specifically ask for people who had some attachment to nature?
Well, yeah, I was basically interviewing people who I knew, people who were part of the assistance community and beyond. And also, I sort of steered the conversation a bit. You know, I forget the exact question I asked most of you, but it was something along the lines of like, why nature? It was pretty broad. Yeah, and so this is what happened. Yes?
I have a question for the actors. I was really impressed by how you were able to embody the gestures of these people. Do you know some of these people? It was uncanny.
You're talking about yourself.
No. I'm thinking of just like some of Stephanie's, her rhythms. And
actually, I do know Stephanie.
Yeah,
That
and the
one I
Moses
do know.
students that
Just
were
that one.
portrayed.
Yeah.
And Tyler's.
Yeah.
I know for me, I did not know anybody, and I think I may have it back, kind of kept it secret for me. And he definitely, I worked with him in all the pieces, and he kind of informed me and gave me hints and tips, and there's a little description of kind of what the person is at the top. So I'm kind of informed by that, but I'm also able to kind of take my own little direction with it.
Yeah. And that I wrote these little descriptions that essentially were not identifying in any way and actually provided very little. And then in rehearsal we would talk a bit more and I provided a bit more info, but I really didn't want them to necessarily be replicates of you guys. You know, it wasn't that they were being you, it was that they were embodying your stories. So, yeah. So, in some ways, you got lucky too. You did it right. Good job. Yeah. Anything else? Great, well thank you again for coming out.